But welcome to the worship Q&A session. We're going to be going around with a little microphone. Where's Busy? Busy, why don't you wave? There you go. There's Busy. If you got a question, just lift your hand up right now, just so that she can clock. We got one question. We might finish in 1 minute. You never know. Yeah, if you got a question as we go along as well, just raise your hand and Busy will come and find you and shout out the question. But before we start, why don't we just do like a little kind of...
We're basically going to ask Joe some really hard questions.
Great. Joe.
Not really.
So Joe is the assistant worship pastor here at church and is an amazing guy. And he's never done anything like this before, so we're going to grill him. But no, in all seriousness, why don't you kind of give us like... You nervous? A kind of 2-minute like explanation of what is worship to you and what does it mean?
Okay. Yes, what is worship? I think I touched on it a little bit in the other seminar for worship for me is, especially using music, if we just narrow it down to that, because I know we all know that worship is a lifestyle and that sort of thing, but for me, using music through worship is just an amazing privilege that we get to use to interact with the living God. So using melodies and harmonies and songs where we can just sing to God. And the great thing is that in Psalm 22 it says, you know, God dwells in the praises of his people. And when we sing and lift our voices, he comes and joins us and the angels join in with us. And I think worship is just a great privilege for us to interact with God. Is that all right?
It's amazing. Great job. Anything you want to add? Or?
I was just, I've just been thinking, probably some of you would remember this song, Dancing Generation, that Matt Redman wrote. And I was just thinking about a line from that recently. It's the overflow of a forgiven soul. Now we've seen you, God, our hearts cannot stay silent. And almost you could put worship in the front of that, couldn't you? Worship is the overflow of a forgiven soul. Now that we've seen him, we can't stay silent. I think that just, I don't know, that's been summing up for me recently. It's the overflow. We can't stop it when we've truly seen God for who he is, and when we understand that our soul has been forgiven. It's an overflow. It's like a reflex, you know. Anyone done that? Like I literally, every single time, I can do it to myself. I don't know why. It's like a reflex. You know, it's like nothing else can stop us doing that once we fully grasp who God is and that we're forgiven in his love. Worship's the only human response, I think, but it's divine as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly
I've just tangled myself in knots. Sorry, got off the plane today. I did the same thing last year, if you want to check that out on YouTube for some more heresy.
Yeah, but that's what it is. It's a response, isn't it? Like, you touched on that. Like, that's why I always think worship is a response to everything that God's done, you know, his creation, you've only got to walk outside, go for a walk and look at his amazing creation. And, you know, we just got back from a trip in Durban in South Africa, and, you know, some of the mountains and the endless beaches. Like, you just look around and you're like, oh my goodness, this creation is insane. And, you know, I have to respond to this because you can tell God how amazing this is. And that's what worship is, really, isn't it? Like, it's our response. It's us joining in with heaven's song. It's, you know, that God's been there from the start and we're just joining in with the party. So yeah, why don't we have our first question? Busy, have you got anyone over there?
How do you tell someone that they are bad at worship? And also, if I'm the person that's being told I'm bad, how do I deal with the discouragement?
Did you get that?
So what was the second bit?
So it's twofold. The first was, how do you tell someone that maybe worship isn't for them, they might not have the skill? And secondly, if you're the one that's receiving that, how do you do that without being discouraged?
When we had to tell Joe, he was quite bad. How did you take it?
It hurt, yeah. It did. I think, honestly, though, in terms of taking that on board of someone saying this isn't for you, you're not cut out to be a worship leader can, really strike you. Or if you're not good enough to sing or something, can really hurt someone. So words are powerful. So firstly, be careful who you're telling that to, because that can really affect someone's growth as a Christian and their relationship with not only Jesus but with the church, and can really hurt them. So I think, though, if it has been said to you, you've got to pray about it, because their word isn't final. God's word is final. And if this is something that God's really called you to do, and you believe that with all your heart, then if one person says something that says the opposite, that can't be the final thing. We've got to really trust in what God's called you in your life. And sometimes that no's not a no for definite, it's a no for a season as well. So I know sometimes I've really wanted to lead worship at some events or like in church and stuff, and for whatever reason I've not been asked, or I've said no to, or whatever, but I still believe that God was calling me to lead people in worship. So you got to trust God in his time, and maybe it's a no for a season and not a no for definite.
I think just quickly, just making that distinction between worship and music. Do you know what I mean? To say to someone you're not good at worship, I just don't think that makes sense. And I think it's so important that worship is an attitude of the heart. Do you know what I mean? No one can be bad at worship. If you're tone deaf, you can worship your socks off, and God that can make a sweet sound to him. Not everyone is musical, on the other hand. Although even if you have a very small essence of musicality, I really think that God can increase that. And the most important thing is the heart. But equally, there are some people, my husband is in this category, he just can't sing, he can't hold a tune, I'll play a note on the piano and he just doesn't even know where it is. And so that's not for him, but he's not bad at worship. He worships. Like, he's one of the most amazing worshippers I think I know, because he goes for it even despite that. He might not be the most musical, and so maybe leading worship with a microphone in front of his mouth might not be for him. But, worship in itself involves everybody, and it should always be that.
I think, especially when you're saying how do you tell someone they're not the best musician is always a really hard thing to do. But again, it comes down to relationship with your team, and how well do you know your team? How well do you know them to be able to tell them that? Because I think if you've got a good friendship with them, and you've known them a while, I think it's a lot easier to tell them when they need to either step up or work a bit more at their instrument, rather than if you're not in relationship with your team and you don't know them very well, it's a lot harder, and I think they take it a bit harder as well. I think if they know that you love them and they know that you're for them as a team member, then I think they'll really listen, and they'll go away and they'll try and get better at their instrument. And that's the thing, you want to try and encourage that honesty on a team, so that we can all be challenging each other as well. Like, how can we be better? Telling people when they're doing a great job and encouraging them, but also, when they've got a bit more work to do, just say, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you do that? That's, it's just another way of wording it, but same time telling them, come on, I believe in you. Do a little bit better. Yeah, does that help? Awesome. Cool, next question.
Hey, to what extent do you have to think about the key that you're singing in terms of, does it serve you as a worship leader more than a congregation? Because there's a lot of awesome worship songs out there, but in order for me to reach the low octave of the verses, I have to sing in a key which means that the chorus is really high and which a lot of people can't reach, and vice versa for chorus and verse. So how much do you have to think about keys that suit you as the worship leader and the congregation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, so it's mainly how do you know what key to start in? And, when some keys are too high to sing in, some are too low, and instead of screeching, how do you pitch that right for yourself and for the congregation? Was that right?
Do you have to choose a key that suits the congregation, that the majority of people can reach, over a key that suits your voice more?
Great question. So I think it's different in different environments as well. I often find, so I've got a funny story for when, I used to lead worship this men's prayer group, and it was probably like 20 men at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I just started leading worship, and for men, men mainly got low voices, and unlike Joe, but and so I went in and led "How Great Is Our God" in the key of C, and if you don't know that, it's quite a high key for guys to sing in, and it was quite embarrassing because there's 20 men trying to sing in C, and it was like, oh God, yeah, it was awful. But and I remember the guy leading the meeting at the end came up to me and was like, hey, why don't you try and lead it in a lower key, just because guys can't sing that high. And so for that environment, next week I put it down to A, and it was like, at the end of it, all the lads were like, whoa, that was amazing, great, we could sing it. And, it was, that kind of suited that environment more, and that was just me on acoustic. But for things like, so like our summer festivals, we often put the songs a little bit higher than we'd sing them in church, just because there's so many people singing them, and so many different people. You've obviously got all the male voices, all the girl voices. You need a kind of majority, and just a little bit higher than the male seems to be a kind of bit of a sweet spot for everyone. So for guys, it's normally about B or C, where we'd lead, kind of big praise songs. But it's different. Beth, you'd probably lead in.
Yeah, so I have to do them different. You could say, do whatever suits the congregation. But obviously, in my case, if I can't sing it, then it's going to sound pretty bad, because that's going to be the loudest voice cutting through. So I think it's it's finding a happy medium, isn't it, really? It's something that serves the congregation, that is singable. But with guys and girls, obviously there's plenty of girls here, I'm sure, lead worship as well. And that's can be a bit of a sticking point sometimes. And I think usually for us, it's pitching things too low, often, girls. And often guys would get, not slated, but, kind of told off or picked on or whatever for singing pushing things too high. So I think it's just finding that happy medium and making sure that, I also think there's something to be said, a little bit like Tom said, like different contexts. There's something to be said about the energy and effort that we put into singing. Sometimes it is appropriate, different types of songs, different lyrics, different tempos, and songs with a lot of energy. It sounds weird if they don't require physical effort from you. Does that make sense? If you sing them too low, like if we were to sing, "You are the way, you are the way." Do you know what I mean? It doesn't really, when the boom, boom, boom is in the background, it doesn't really match up. So it's finding that happy medium. And a lot of it's trial and error. I've done songs in ministry time and thought, oh my gosh, I've just started this and it's so squeaky, I'm not going to do that again. In a ministry time, I need to really think about ramping it down a little bit in terms of key. So it's trial and error, I think. And people hopefully give you honest feedback.
Yeah, hi. What would you say to a young person who's been to Soul Survivor and been inspired by the worship that's cool and relevant, and yet when they go back to their church, there's quite a disparity in style and relevance that may make them think, I'm not sure if I want to get involved in the worship here?
So I remember going to Soul Survivor when I was a teenager, so when I was about 13, 14. And I remember it was when like Tim and Matt were leading worship then. And I remember we'd go to Soul Survivor with my whole youth group, and then we'd, you know, remember all the songs that they did at Soul Survivor with, you know, all the kind of big praise songs. And then we'd go back to our little church and try and replicate the same thing. And it just like went over people's heads. People were like, what the heck is this? You know, so I remember being that kid who went to Soul Survivor and was really, really excited and wanted to bring that back to my church. And I think the ways I found really helpful was I had a pastor who was very releasing and had to kind of really tell the pastor what the vision was, you know, what we were trying to do as a worship team, as a youth worship team. You know, we just experienced all this, you know, new songs and, you know, people were doing congas in the worship. What's that about? You know, should we be doing that? I don't know, you know. And we had a kind pastor who was like, all right, well, let's have youth lead worship and we'll just follow you all. You know, that's fine. We want to support you guys. And I think that's why it's so key to have, you know, the worship pastor and the pastor of the church to have such a tight relationship, because they work so closely with each other, and almost your pastor is your gatekeeper to how far you can release worship to your church. And I don't know, do you guys have anything to add on that?
I think also it's the expectation of you might not be able to do the whole set that, you know, Beth or Tom would do at this festivals, but, you know, slowly introducing stuff. So maybe dynamite would not go down a treat in a service. But for example, maybe something like "Take My Heart," you know, really simple, easy song to do, isn't it, Tom? Yeah.
Really simple.
It's got an E minor in it, come on.
So, you know, maybe introduce that slowly into the youth group and then slowly into the service, rather than, I think Mike always says, if you want to boil a frog or something, you put them in cold water first and then gradually heat the water up until you cook them, or something like that. And I think that whole point is, don't just chuck them into boiling water because they'll jump out. If, you know, a church who isn't used to some of the songs and stuff, or the style that something like a festival or a conference does, then don't come straight back and just smack them in the face with it. Slowly start to introduce it. Like Tom said, slowly, you know, tell people the vision behind why you want to do these songs, why you want to jump up and down to a song. You know, so gradually and slowly do it rather than just straight in. Maybe that might help. I don't know.
Yeah, there's this thing Mike always says about if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's so important for worship teams, you know, leading congregations. When you're introducing new songs, new styles of worship, anything new, I think you got to, it's not an overnight thing. It's a, you know, be prepared to go on a bit of a journey with it. You know, even at my last church, there was a service that was, you know, quite a new service, but kind of mainly designed for aimed at, you know, classical worship. So it's, you know, we sung a lot of hymns and stuff like that. And we'd just have someone on acoustic guitar, and that's all they wanted. And then slowly, surely we added in a keyboard, and but had to do it very, very slowly. And then we added in a cajon as well. And then we thought it would be great just to start putting in a little drum kit down there. And it was hilarious because we put a drum kit just put it ready at the back of stage. So it was, you could see it, but it wasn't set up or anything. And the first week we put it up, there were so many complaints of, you know, people were like, what's that drum kit doing here? We don't want that in here. And we're like, it's all right, it's not being used, we're just storing it. And then, you know, one week we had, you know, the guy sitting on a cajon, but then he had a kick. We put the kick drum down. And so we had one drum. And then no one noticed. No one really, a few people were like, oh, it sounded really good today. And no one really noticed. And then slowly but surely we put a snare in, and they're playing on hats. And then before you know it, there's a whole drum kit set up and everyone's like, oh, this is great. So you got to take, and that probably took a few months of doing that. But you just got to be prepared to go on a bit of a journey with it. Any more?
Put your hands up.
Anyone for a question?
Well,
Down
we've
here.
got a few. Oh, yeah, one over there. Yeah, one right over there. Run, busy, run.
Oh, Christ, that's loud. Sorry, my language. What advice would you have for a smaller band who are trying to, lead worship, but also make it interesting for other people when they don't have as many, don't have a synth or a massive drum kit or a 5-string bass or something? What ideas could you give?
I'm just thinking of your cousin's band. Yeah, Royal Blood. Royal Blood, bassist and a drummer. That's their whole band. So I think I think for all of us, it's great to expand our view of what a band should look like. It seems like there's been a model that perhaps has dictated the way things should be, hasn't there? Let's be honest. Hillsong, Bethel, even Soul Survivor, where it's like you've got to have drums, this, synth, blah, 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 blah. And actually, most Sundays, we won't even have that. It'll be a hodgepodge of things, like we had violins the other day on Easter Sunday. Do you know what I mean? All kinds of different stuff. And I think one of my friends who plays bass for an artist that's in the charts all the time, said that often he finds he's most creative when he limits himself. So sometimes he'll even remove a couple of strings from his guitar and see kind of what comes out of it. So I just think it's a great practice for us, rather than looking at all the holes in our band. Oh, I don't have this, I don't have that. Thinking about what we do have, and you can come up with some really cool stuff. Almost less can be more with music, and also there's less of a wall of noise as well. The less people that there are, if you really work at playing together, you can create an amazing sound and come up with a fresh new model that no one else is using. Do you know what I mean? That could be the next big thing. Just drums and bass, and that's it. But using it creatively or whatever it is. So yeah, I just think nothing looks like the festivals at Soul Survivor or Hillsong Church in Australia. Most local churches don't look like that, ours included. There's so, even the other night, Josh, I can't remember where he is, but he was leading the other night, and there was no BVs. I think there was only 4 of them in the band. And do you know what I mean? That's normal life. So to encourage you, that's exactly what our church looks like too. And I think that can be a positive, that can be a plus rather than a minus.
It's one thing Joe does. You detune your guitar, don't you?
Yeah. So I not out of tune, no. So I tune it just a whole step down. So my E string was D string and so on. So, and yeah, just grabbing people or looking at artists and bands that do stuff differently, and how can we take that into church? How can we take, all right, we've not got a drummer this week, how can we get some sort of percussion? I mean, one week we had bins, a whole group of people playing bins, which doesn't sound great, but in terms of people just joining in and getting that rhythm, it's something different. It doesn't have to be the set band. It doesn't have to be the norm. Just really, the best thing to do is look for, Radio 1 Live Lounge. They do loads of covers of songs that would just be the typical drums, bass, electric guitar, keys, synths, and then they strip it right down to maybe just a guitar or maybe keys and guitar or just anything, and they take a song that we all know and love, and we love it because of how it is, and make it their own and make it different, and it can sometimes really take it to another level. And so I just encourage you to look around, look for, different bands and artists that are doing that sort of thing.
Definitely, and it's definitely one thing, like Beth said, we're learning at as well. We we don't always have full band for worship. Like when we have our worship team nights, we'll strip it right back to maybe keys, acoustic guitar, and cajon, and just look for different ways. Could we put someone in there as well who plays cello? Something that's an instrument that's going to really add but not overpower for that environment. And even looking at like what you can do, like in those, like we're saying, how can we experiment in those things as well? Like detuning your guitar, you get a whole different sound, and it just brings something different to worship. And you look at like I went and saw Ed Sheeran play, and he does his whole world tour just him on an acoustic guitar and fills Wembley Stadium and everything like that. And all he does is loops his acoustic, so he'll play like a line, record it, loop it, and then put another line over it. And the sound, it sounds full, it sounds huge, but it's just him on an acoustic guitar. And same with that guy Jack Garrett. He'll just play electric guitar, and then he's got like a little drum machine in front of him where he's able to strum, play a drum beat, trigger it. All like different things. So like definitely check out some of the live lounge stuff. Listen to a bit more, different music, get a few ideas, get creative, and try stuff. Don't be afraid to try stuff. That's the thing. I think that's what we're afraid of. We can always think there's like a set way to do something, but there isn't. Best things come out when we take risks.
When you worship, when you worship, how do you take everybody in the room with you to worship? Do you go straight into it, or do you gradually build up?
Don't mind. How do you take people with you in worship? It's a really good question. I think that's the important thing, to take people with you. What that looks like probably looks different for different contexts, but some of the best worship leaders that I know are people that even when things feel like a struggle, and I'm sure all of you would have led those services where it's like, oh, this feels like wading through treacle, not really getting anything back. It feels like people don't even want to worship, although that might not be true. Maybe it looks like that, sea of blank faces or whatever. And some of the best worship leaders I know are those people that are like, rather than getting discouraged and thinking, I'm just going to finish this song and then end it, and then we'll go on to the talk, just having that attitude of, you are going to come with me to the presence of God, whether you like it or not. I'm taking you there by the scruff of the neck. And just really bringing people with you and, taking it by the scruff of the neck. I don't really know how to say that any better in musical terms, but I think a lot of it's having that attitude of, rather than giving up and thinking nothing's working, just having that gutsy kind of, you come with me whether you like it or not. But also I think it does rely on a few practical things as well. So there's ways of bringing people with you, a bit like Joe said, don't chuck the frog in hot water. If you do something that's totally wacky and totally out of what people are used to, that's not going to help to bring people with you. If you start a set by singing in tongues for 5 minutes, when your church is not into that stuff, that's going to freak them out. That's not going to be, do you know what I mean? That's not going to bring people with you. And I think if we really believe that worship isn't just something that we do at people, but it's us kind of almost initiating a corporate conversation with God and a corporate encounter with God. If that's the way that we truly view it, then then we'll make decisions based on, okay, well, what's really going to draw people in, rather than, oh, this is just what I had planned, so, suck it and see kind of thing. You're stuck with this plan, whether you like it or not. But, really having that attitude of serving people.
Awesome. Yeah, just to add, I think with kind of taking people with you, I think you got to always have one eye on God and one eye on the congregation, and see what God wants to do, but also see where people are at and, again, find that middle ground of, right, how do you sweep everyone up with you and take people to a place where God wants? And we learn every week something new how to do that, because there's no right or wrong way to do it, really. It's just about how obedient we are, and how are we listening to God in that moment? Are we, asking God, okay, what is it you want to do today? And again, prepare yourselves to be, taken on a different route in worship. And I think that's when it gets tricky, of how do you take everyone on a different journey when they think they're going on this journey. But you got to trust God as well. God wants to take people. He'll do it, and he'll use you.
Probably only got time for a couple more, haven't we? Yeah, cool.
Cool, yeah. Excuse me. So I know obviously we talked about worship being far more than just music, and actually and it's great that it's been so focused on music. But I just wonder, for those who aren't so musically inclined, but they want to do something, have you ever had any really good examples of alternative forms of worship, I don't know, like dance or drama or things like that brought in, and how that's kind of done? I don't know if you have any good examples and how that's done, but for those who may not be overly musically inclined but want to do something and kind of push people into a new kind of I don't know, a new presence of God, I suppose. Any examples of that, or how it's done?
Yeah, I mean, dancing is a great example of people basically just taking their own passions and using that to worship God. So we've got in our church, I think they meet up like once a month, movement in worship, and it's just a group of people that come together and they love to worship and they love to dance. So they put the two together and they just, for an hour, dance and use that as worship to God. And I know on a Sunday, she's often dancing to the side, and sometimes she moves to the front. And that's really actually brings a real freedom to the room when, we can see that someone just loves Jesus and she's just doing what she would naturally do, and that's to dance. And I think that brings great freedom to the team, to the congregation. I think there's loads of other ways to serve as well. So for us, we have the worship team, but under that comes production. So we have stuff like visuals, which is so important for leading people in worship, because everyone needs the words, even the worship leaders and stuff like that. So that's really important. And then if you're passionate about it, we touched on it again in the other seminar of, if this is something you're passionate about, worship, but not got anything in your body that resounds something musical, why don't you just commit to praying for that band, praying for, really that they would lead the people of God to the next level where God wants to take them to. And so, there's so much to do to benefit the whole church in worship, even if you're not got anything creative or musical to give. Yeah.